so bright, so beautiful, my precious. Okay, I'm not gonna lie when I say this, but I'm actually genuinely really nervous covering The Lord of the Rings because I've been wanting to do this for so many years now, but I just haven't because there is just so much in this trilogy that I love. There is so much to love, there is so much to cover that it's very daunting. I feel like I'm gonna miss stuff out. I know for a fact that when I'm editing this video, I'm just gonna be sitting back just being like, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say that? Why didn't I record this bit? I know it's gonna happen, but hey ho, we'll give it a go. Now, if you were to ask me what is my favorite film, I would tell you Back to the Future. But if you include trilogies into the mix, and you treat Lord of the Rings like it is one big, massive film, which it technically is, then I would say the Lord of the Rings trilogy, just because the story this trilogy tells, the filmmaking in this trilogy, is absolutely phenomenal and just... I love this trilogy so much. I have loved these movies since I was, what, 11, 12? I mean, growing up in my younger years, like when I was like 3 years and above, I was a Harry Potter kid. But it was in my early tweens, my teenage years, where I got into Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Tolkien as a whole, and I love this trilogy. Though I do actually have a memory of watching The Two Towers when I was very young, because I remember turning it off and not liking it because I didn't like Gollum and the Balrog. I remember they scared me, but I do have distinctive memories of watching scenes like the Westfold burning. Like, I do remember that. That is like ingrained in my brain. Also, when I first watched these films, I watched them in the complete wrong order. I bought the DVD of Return of the King from CEX, and then so I sat down and watched Return of the King. I turned it off halfway through because I had no idea what the hell was going on. I went back to CEX and bought Two Towers, and then I watched that and really enjoyed it, and then I watched Return of the King and fell in love with it. And then it wasn't until a couple of months later where I finally sat down and watched Fellowship of the Ring. So the first time I watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I watched it in the complete wrong order. And then a few years later, I went and bought the extended editions. And to be honest, I haven't really gone back to the theatrical cut since because, just in my opinion, I think the extended editions are the superior versions of The Lord of the Rings. Especially since you get the complete story, like you get the conclusion of Saruman, which I think is just... I thought that was so stupid that they had to cut that from the theatrical cut. Like, you need that because the excuse Gandalf gives of, oh no, he has no power here is just bullshit. Faramir's role in Two Towers makes a bit more sense and he comes across as less of an asshole than he is because... I will get onto it, but for some reason, Faramir is an asshole in Two Towers when in the books he just isn't. And speaking of scenes that they cut, and I have no idea why they cut, why did they cut the Mouth of Sauron scene? That scene is not only visually disgusting, but it's also just a very important and pivotal moment, and they cut it. Now, before we get into the films, let me just give you a quick backstory and history on my relationship with the Lord of the Rings books. I love The Hobbit. I've read that book, I think, about 3 or 4 times. I genuinely think it's a fantastic story. Bilbo Baggins is one of my favorite Middle-earth characters. I think he's great. And of course, it's a brilliant children's book and a beloved classic and all that. But when it comes to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I've technically read it twice. The first time I read it, I think I was about 12 or 13. It was whenever The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey came out, because I remember being on like a massive Middle-earth binge. Like, I read The Hobbit and then I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy after that. And technically, I didn't actually finish my first read-through of the Lord of the Rings. I got to the bit in the Crack of Doom where Gollum bites off Frodo's finger, he dances off the precipice and falls into the lava and the ring is destroyed. And after that, I kind of like skimmed the ending. When it comes to the Lord of the Rings, I'm just not entirely a massive fan of Tolkien's writing style. There's just so much description, so many names, so many songs thrown at you that by the end, you're kind of just overwhelmed. It's very overwhelming. There are also bits of the story that feel a bit tensionless, and I'll get onto this when I get into Fellowship of the Ring, the film, and why I think it's better than the book. They are not bad books, do not get me wrong, they're a classic for a reason, but to me, I just don't entirely gel with Tolkien's writing style. I mean, The Hobbit is easy enough to digest because it's a children's book, but when Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings, he wrote it like he was writing history in a way. He was writing his own mythology for England, like, so of course it's going to be more complex than a kid's book. Though I do want to revisit the Lord of the Rings trilogy at some point, but of course I'm committing to the Wheel of Time book series right now, and I'm only on book 4 of that, and I think there's what, like 14, 15 books in that? But one of the reasons why I want to revisit it is the fact that Andy Serkis has recorded audiobooks for the entire trilogy and The Hobbit, and just, if I can listen to Andy Serkis doing the Gollum voice, particularly in book form, yeah, I'm of course going to jump at the chance of that. I mean, I love Rob Inglis's audiobooks, they're great, but I mean, it's Andy Serkis, and if I can hear him do the Gollum voice, like, yeah. Smee girl, why does he cry? Okay, enough pointless backstory, let's actually get into my thoughts on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, starting off with The Fellowship of the Ring. The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, I think is probably the best made, the best paced Lord of the Rings film. There's something about The Fellowship of the Ring that is magical. Not only is it the perfect introduction to the Middle-earth world, but also there's just something about the way Peter Jackson has edited the film where the film feels like it's two separate films mashed together, but it's done so effortlessly and perfectly that it just whizzes by. By the time you get to, the hour mark, the hour 15 mark, where Elrond and the Council form the Fellowship of the Ring, you feel like the film has only just started. It's so well paced, but also, you've just sat through a whole hour of content. Like, it's so well done. And speaking of well done, the prologue to the Fellowship of the Ring is genuinely phenomenal. Nothing has ever touched it in terms of the ability to be expositional but also incredibly visual and cinematic. Everything about it, from Cate Blanchett's narration as Galadriel, "The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I smell it in the air." It covers the entire backstory and all the necessary history and mythology of Middle-earth that you need to know in, under 10 minutes? If I am gonna nitpick something with the prologue, and realistically it's not even a nitpick that applies to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but more to the Hobbit trilogy, the thing that is slightly jarring is seeing Ian Holmes' Bilbo Baggins in, his blue blazer, when in An Unexpected Journey he's wearing a burgundy red one, and it's like, come on, Jackson, you could have at least had the outfits matching. Also, it's only slightly jarring just because I prefer Martin Freeman as Bilbo Baggins to Ian Holm. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're both phenomenal in their own right, but just, I love Martin Freeman as Bilbo, and so it's kind of just weird watching the prologue and you see, like, a little segment of the Riddles in the Dark sequence, and it's not Martin Freeman. But overall, the prologue sequence in Fellowship of the Ring is genuinely perfect. The little references to the poem from the book, the 9 rings given to mortal men doomed to die and all that, it's so well done. There's just great visuals, great music, and it does such a great job at setting up the stakes of Middle-earth. Not to mention the cinematography and camera work done in that opening action sequence when that camera is zipping through the armies in Mordor. It's genuinely cinematic stuff. And of course, we get the iconic introductions to the Shire, Frodo meeting Gandalf, Bilbo's party, Frodo's dropping those amazing dance moves during the party. Now, getting into something I mentioned earlier, the film improves upon the book material because, to me, there's actually a sense of tension and stakes when it comes to Frodo leaving the Shire and being chased by the Nazgul. In the book, it's a very nonchalant affair. Gandalf disappears after telling Frodo briefly about the ring. Gandalf goes off and does his research. Years pass by. He goes back, tells Frodo all the stuff that is very important, like this is the One Ring and all that kind of stuff. And then Gandalf leaves again, and then as Gandalf leaves, Frodo eventually leaves like a couple of months later. And it's just so slow and casual. When he and Sam are along the road and they bump into Merry and Pippin, Frodo's just like, "Oh yeah, Sam, there's this black shadow following us." And then they kind of just like casually go along their way. And then all the stuff with Tom Bombadil happens, and then they go off into the Barrow Downs, and then they're saved by Tom Bombadil. And then after that, Frodo captures another glimpse of the Nazgul, and it's just like, "Oh guys, there is stuff still following us." And it's so tensionless. Like, there isn't a sense of, horror to the Nazgul. It's just, "Oh yeah, there are these people following us. Let's walk along the road to Bree." But when it comes to the Peter Jackson version, there is a supernatural horror thriller element to it. The cinematography in that sequence is gorgeous. The dolly zoom, I love the dolly zoom so much. This film introduced me to the dolly zoom. I think it is just phenomenal. The way Peter Jackson and cinematographer Andrew Lesnie utilized the dolly zoom sort of to bring this supernatural eerie effect is something that I just love and adore, and in many ways it sort of cemented the idea in my brain that dolly zooms should only really be reserved for that kind of effect. It's actually something I've used in one of my own short films, in Orphan Yuri. I used it to sort of accentuate that the sequence in the tunnel isn't really as what it seems. It's supposed to be a psychedelic sort of effect. And not to mention, the silhouette shots in this film are gorgeous. Everything to do with the Nazgul. The shot where Gandalf, Frodo, and Sam are leaving the Shire and there's that purple dawn rising in the background, just like, oh.
Come along, Samwise. Keep up.
Cinema. This is cinema. If there's one thing I'm gonna nitpick with the cinematography, and this is something I have to say for the whole trilogy, I genuinely hate this weird missing frames, low shutter speed, slow motion effect. It looks cheap and awful, and I hate it. And the thing that baffles me is that Peter Jackson utilizes other forms of slow motion in this trilogy. He uses like 60 frames and 120 frames per second slow motion, and it's really smooth and really crisp and really nice. So why do we get this weird shitty-ass low shutter speed effect? I hate it. It looks so cheap. But other than that, The Fellowship of the Ring is an amazing film. I mean, our introduction to characters like Aragorn and Boromir and Legolas and Gimli and the formation of the Fellowship. I mean, the sequence where the Fellowship walk over the rocks together and the music is blaring the Fellowship theme, the dun 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 dun. It's amazing. The whole sequence in Moria is just fantastic, though I do have a nitpick with that sequence too, and that's mainly Frodo just being a very overdramatic bitch. When the troll stabs Frodo and he's all just like, and then literally moments later he's just like, don't worry guys, I'm fine. I'm not hurt. Why were you being so overdramatic then, just being like, like acting like he was dying? Like, I know the mithril shirt protected him and all that. I'm guessing that it probably did hurt a bit since he was like probably like punched with the force of, I don't know, like a car or something. But I just find the phrasing just to be odd, like, oh, I'm not hurt. So it's like, so why were you being so dramatic then? And then of course when it comes to the Mines of Moria sequence, there is the stuff with the Balrog and the stuff at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, and Gandalf obviously being dramatic as fuck with the "You shall not pass!
You shall not pass!
Which is a great scene, but I also have a nitpick with it, and that is, the magic kind of doesn't do anything. This is actually a nitpick I have with the whole magic in this trilogy too, is that the way Peter Jackson depicts magic isn't very fantastical. The fight with Gandalf and Saruman, for example, is literally just two old men basically like force pushing each other, and it's not very cinematic. Though I will say I love some of the reaction shots of Ian McKellen just being like, it's just funny to me. But I remember watching the Unusual Suspects review for Fellowship of the Ring, and he pointed out the sequence in the Bridge of Khazad-dûm where Gandalf does "You shall not pass" and all that, and the way it's edited, and yeah, he kind of raises a good point how it's kind of awkward because Gandalf does it and nothing really happens, and it's not until when the Balrog steps onto the bridge does the magic finally take effect, and it's kind of like, you could have just edited it in a way to make it seem like Gandalf did something really awesome and impactful. Give them a moment for pity's sake! But Gandalf's death scene is done really well, and overall the ending to Fellowship of the Ring, the stuff at Amon Hen, the battle between the Fellowship and the Uruk-hai, and then the fracturing of the Fellowship where Frodo is being chased by Boromir, is so well done, and Boromir is just such a fascinating character, and it's portrayed so excellently by Sean Bean. And his sacrifice is just so well filmed and so well done.
I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king.
And one of my favourite moments, or one of my favourite things in Fellowship of the Ring is Aragorn and Frodo's friendship. Specifically the moment in Amon Hen when Aragorn finds Frodo and he looks into his eyes and he can tell that Frodo is going to leave them. And the bit where Frodo's just like, would you destroy it? And then Aragorn closes his hand and is just like, I would have gone with you to the end. Into the very fires of Mordor. Like, oh my god, I love their friendship so much in this film. It's just so wholesome.
I would have gone with you to the end, into the very fires of Mordor.
And the way the film ends too, with Frodo and Sam seeing Mordor off in the distance, and then obviously Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli going after Merry and Pippin. It's so good. It's such a great ending. And similar to, say, Dune Part 1, it's not a cohesive ending. All the narrative plot threads aren't done, but it still basically leaves you off with an ending of, hey, there's more to come, stick around. When it comes to The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, it's actually my least favourite of the trilogy, but also, I actually prefer The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey to this film. And the reason why I think that is mainly just because this film is... It's not really a drag per se, but you can definitely tell they are padding out the length of the story. And the reason why I think this is kind of funny is just because they took elements from the Two Towers book like Shelob and actually put that in Return of the King. And so because they took a big chunk out of the Two Towers book, they basically had to go, I don't know, a random subplot where Aragorn almost dies. There's also things like Treebeards and the Ents, which are fine, but realistically those scenes go on for way too long because the Ents just talk too slowly. I mean, at least Peter Jackson had the sense to cut out the endless poems and songs sung by the Ents, but yeah, the Ents scenes still kind of drag. And when it comes to Helm's Deep, which is obviously one of the film's main selling points, the film kind of drags its feet to get to Helm's Deep because it just keeps going, they're all gonna die. They say it is hopeless. We won't make it through the night. We're all gonna die.
Then I shall die as one of them.
Fuck yes, Aragorn. This is why you're the best. But the Battle of Helm's Deep, though, is incredible. I love it so much. Everything down to Legolas shield surfing down the stairs, to his rivalry with Gimli. Also, I love the death of Haldir. Like, I find it so funny because the film just goes out of its way to make you care about this side character you saw for maybe, what, like 2 minutes in Fellowship of the Ring? And Aragorn's all just like, Haldir! They make it all big and dramatic. They put it in slow motion. Just, I love it. And obviously I've jumped ahead a little bit into it, but when it comes to Two Towers, one of the things obviously that is really great is exploring the kingdom of Rohan, characters like Theoden and Éowyn, and her little relationship thing with Aragorn, whatever that is supposed to be. Because Aragorn genuinely does care about Éowyn, it's just that he also loves Arwen a lot, and so he doesn't really lead Éowyn along, but it's kind of that thing where it's like, I don't know, it's a sticky situation. Another one of the selling points of Two Towers is Gollum.
The thieves, the filthy little thieves. They stole it from us. It's ours.
Gollum is the best character in The Lord of the Rings. He is the best written character. And one of the things that I love with what Peter Jackson and his writing team did with Gollum is that they expanded upon the character. Don't get me wrong, the stuff Tolkien wrote about Gollum in the books is genuinely amazing, but what Peter Jackson and his writing team did in making Gollum a more three-dimensional character than he is in the books, because Gollum is a very well fleshed out character in the books, but a lot of the stuff that happens with Gollum you kind of hear off screen, or it's told in anecdotes or little history notes. But with what Peter Jackson and his team do with Gollum in the films is they just make him more fleshed out. They almost give him a redemption arc in a way. And they also parallel him and Frodo really well. Like, they very much present the idea that if Frodo goes down the wrong path, he could end up turning into Gollum.
Mustn't ask us. Not its business.
Oh, that's from The Hobbit. You've also got the return of Gandalf the White, which I just think is so funny that in the trailer for Two Towers, they literally reveal Gandalf the White. It's like, the film treats it like it's a reveal, and the trailer's just like, nah, you saw that in the trailer already, Gandalf's coming back. There is a scene that I do find slightly odd in the extended edition, and that is Éowyn singing. Like, I don't really know how I feel about it, because on the one hand, I get why it's there. Like, it's to show the culture of Rohan and show how much Éowyn loves her cousin, but also, it kind of just comes out of nowhere. Also, the internet has forever ruined the scene where Gandalf and Theoden talk as Theoden is looking over the tomb of his dead son, because the moment where Theoden starts crying, because that scene has been memed, I'm not saying it's funny, but it's... Don't get me wrong, Bernard Hill acted the fuck out of it, and he plays that scene perfectly. I just blame the internet for turning that into a meme. And speaking of memes, they're taking the hobbits to Isengard!
They're taking the hobbits to Isengard!
I love that. I love that so much. It's perfect. Orlando Bloom. Also, one of the things too that I just love about the Lord of the Rings trilogy is like the behind the scenes stuff. Obviously, the infamous moment of Viggo breaking his toe as he kicks the helmet. Like, it's great. Did you know that Viggo Mortensen broke his toe when he kicked the helmet? But to quickly summarize, I think The Two Towers is a good film. It's just my least favorite of the trilogy because they just pad things out. Easily, the selling points of Two Towers is the Battle of Helm's Deep and Gollum. Everything to do with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum is really great in this film. Though, obviously, Faramir is hit and miss because he's kind of an asshole in this film, even though he isn't like that in the books. I'll get onto that later. And whilst I do think it is the lesser of the three films, it's still iconic as hell. We get all the memes. It's great. To me, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King is my favorite of the trilogy. It's such a wonderful conclusion to this epic and masterful trilogy. It's not a perfect film by any means. I mean, there is no such thing as a perfect film, but for me, this is just the best one. There are some silly things in this film similar to the rest of the trilogy. In this film, for me, it's the subplot between Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, where Gollum tricks Frodo into thinking Sam ate all the lembas bread, and it's like, I get why it's in the film. If I'm remembering correctly, I remember Lindsay Ellis coining the term the Peach conflict, which is basically Peter Jackson injecting a sense of conflict between Frodo and Sam just for the sake of having conflict, even though there didn't really need to be conflict, because in the books, Frodo and Sam enter Shelob's lair together, and they get separated because it's a dark spider cave. They get lost in the maze, I kind of, like, I don't know why the bread subplot is in there. I mean, I get why it's in there. It's there to create conflict, but realistically, you don't need it. And it's that thing where I'm sitting down and I'm watching the film and I'm like, I know this subplot is silly. I know why it's here because obviously there is that innate human nature of, oh, we're gonna starve to death. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter in terms of the overall plot. But other than that, though, Return of the King, I love this movie. It is the best one. The opening with Gollum and seeing his origin story is not only just horrifying to watch, but it's also gross and disgusting. I will never, ever, ever erase the image of Gollum biting into that raw fish. It is just, ugh.
They cursed us, and we wept. Oh, how we wept, precious.
Saruman's death sequence is an amazing scene and should not have been cut from the theatrical release. I genuinely do not understand why they cut that. They could have cut any number of scenes throughout the film, but they cut one of the most important, which was the death of Saruman. Like, what? You've got Merry and Pippin singing the Green Dragon song, and that's just amazing. You can drink your fancy ales, you can have and boy the flagon, but the only brew for the brave and true comes from the Green Dragon. The lighting of the beacon sequence is genuinely phenomenal, and I love, love, love the moment where Aragorn bursts into the hall, and he's like, the beacons of Gondor! The beacons are lit! Gondor calls for aid! And Theoden is just like, and Rohan shall answer. Like, it's such an amazing moment. The music kicks in, the dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Pippin's song is so cool, and I love the story behind that, how Peter Jackson was just like, you know, I think we should have Mary sing. And then Billy Boyd worked with composer Howard Shore, and they came up with Edge of Night, and it's such an amazing song. Home is behind the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, through shadow to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Mist and shadow, cloud and shade, all shall fade, all shall fade. The Siege of Minas Tirith is genuinely fantastic and a visual spectacle. I mean, grand. Denethor setting himself on fire and just running across that entire precipice and then falling off. What a shot. That is amazing. Aragorn receiving Underil from Elrond is just one of the best scenes. It is basically the visualization of his character arc, of him finally putting aside the Ranger and becoming the king he was born to be. The music in that scene. Bwah, 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 bwah. Bwah, bwah, bwah. Bwah, 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 bwah. I love the shot where the camera just pans up the length of the blade, just highlighting how long it is. Like, it's one of my favorite bits. Also, Viggo Mortensen's sexy manly whisper of, the blade that was broken shall return to Minas Tirith. I mean, he's just got so many sexy whispers throughout the entire trilogy, and a lot of them are in Return of the King.
The blade that was broken shall return to Minas Tirith. It has been remade. Behold the sword of Elendil.
Behold the sword of Elendil. Then there's the Ride of the Rohirrim and the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Like, the way Peter Jackson represents that, Theoden's speech, death! And then the music that plays as the Rohirrim charges into battle is nothing short of just orgasmic. I get goosebumps and chills every time. It is genuinely one of the most incredible epic moments in all of cinema. You've got Orlando Bloom's Legolas taking down an Oliphant, and it's cool. It's ridiculously over the top, but so is most of the action in the trilogy, and it's so good, though. And then whilst all that's going on, you have everything to do with Frodo and Sam and Gollum. Everything in Shelob's lair is terrifying. And then when Frodo and Sam finally get to Mordor, and they're just on the base of Mount Doom, and they're just climbing up it, and, like, it's just so gnarly and visceral. The music that plays as Frodo is trying to climb the mountain. Like, they just look beaten as shit, man. Like, Frodo and Sam's, like, chapped lips, and then, like, when Frodo face plants into the ground, and there's just, like, dirt all over his mouth. And then there's the moment, too, where Frodo just, like, wastes the water, and it hurts my heart every time. It's like, Frodo, stop being such a little bitch. And then when they finally get there, when they finally get to the Crack of Doom, and Frodo's standing on the edge, he's holding the ring, and he's just like, the ring is mine. And you see the failure. You feel it in the way Elijah Wood says it. Just the way he delivers that line, you just internally go, oh no. No. And then that's all intercut with the stuff at the Black Gate, and the battle at the Black Gate is amazing as well. Aragorn's speech, like, oh god. Sons of Gondor, of Rohan, my brothers, I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. And the for Frodo moment too, where Aragorn turns round to see Gandalf. Gandalf holds up the Mithril shirt. You see the tears in Aragorn's eyes, and he's just like, for Frodo, and he charges, and then everyone else starts charging. Merry and Pippin follow, the rest of the armies follow, and the music's all like da 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 da. This is cinema. This is, yeah. And I mean, like I said before, Aragorn and Frodo's friendship is so wholesome. The scene where the Fellowship is reunited again, I love it so much. It's so just, like, weird. Like, they all just act like they're stoned and high. And it's just, it's such a, like, wholesome, tender moment, but it's also just silly, too. Like, Gandalf's laughing of, like, It's creepy. And one of my favorite things in that scene too is, because it's kind of like an internet meme that Legolas only says one line to Frodo, and that is, and you have my bow. It's just funny that when the Fellowship is reunited and Frodo sees Legolas, he doesn't say anything, because when he sees Gimli, he's all like, Gimli, Aragorn, and then Legolas just walks in and he's just like, oh, you, I don't remember your name. I just find that so funny. And then begins the multiple endings to Return of the King. You have Aragorn's coronation and his coronation song. You have the my friends you bow to no one moment, and that scene, man, I never fail to tear up at that moment. It is so wholesome, so pure. The entirety of Minas Tirith bows towards these four hobbits. It's so wholesome, man. And I very distinctly remember the first time I finished Return of the King, I cried. Like, seeing Frodo go off to the Grey Havens was incredibly sad and tragic. And as the years go by, I just kind of realized how sad and tragic Frodo's story actually is, because at the end of the day, he failed. Frodo was able to withstand the power and seduction of the ring until the very last moment. And whilst the only two people that really knew what happened at the Crack of Doom was Sam and Gollum, it's that thing where Frodo himself knew internally that whilst he is praised as Frodo the hero, Frodo of the Nine Fingers, he failed. And there's a really fantastic video essay, I've forgotten who made it, but I will link it somewhere, about the endings to Return of the King and why there aren't too many endings, and why at the end of watching this 11-hour trilogy, you need these endings, you need the catharsis of seeing our hero's stories wrapped up nicely in a neat bow. But also, that video essay really just highlights the tragedy of Frodo's story, and why him going to the Grey Havens, whilst it is sad, is also a very happy and tender moment. Just Return of the King, man. Like, the end credits song too by Annie Lennox, Into the West, is just... What can you see on the horizon? Now getting onto the characters, we'll start off with Frodo. I really like Elijah Wood as Frodo. I think he does a good job in the role. There are times though where like his acting is a bit, I don't know what to call it. He does a very specific thing where most of his Frodo lines are delivered like this. Oh Sam, my dear Sam, I can't do this anymore, Sam. It's not bad, it's just that he does this weird delivery sometimes. And one of the things I will complain about Frodo in the trilogy is I'm not really a fan of how much of a wimp he is. Like, I understand that when Tolkien wrote Frodo, Frodo was meant to be the everyman sent off to war, basically. And I think Peter Jackson understands it very well. I just think he goes a bit too far, and that's mainly because Frodo is such a bitch. He barely stands up for himself. He only does it twice in the entire trilogy, and that is when Gollum Gollum is choking out Sam in Two Towers, and he holds Sting at Gollum's neck, and he's like, "This is Sting. You've seen it before, haven't you, Gollum?" And the second time is in Return of the King, when he basically pushes Gollum off the precipice into the lava. Other than that, Frodo is just such a massive liability. He's getting captured all the time. He's getting stabbed all the time. He's falling over all the time. Like, genuinely, he falls over so many times. Like, I understand Frodo is not meant to be the dashing epic war hero or anything, but Peter Jackson kind of makes him look like a clumsy bitch. Like, really? Frodo couldn't have at least tried to attempt fighting the Witch King of Angmar? I mean, Sam does it. Why don't you have Frodo do it? And now we get on to my favorite character in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn, son of Arathorn, is just perfect. I love him so much. Aragorn in these films, to me, is just the peak of masculinity. He is kind, he's humble, he's dashing, but he is also a hero. He's a king, he's noble, he's honorable. But also, when push comes to shove, he will not hesitate to take you down. I mean, Viggo Mortensen was just incredibly cast in this role. The stories you hear of the behind the scenes, like how in Fellowship of the Ring, when Lurtz throws the dagger at him, he wasn't supposed to do that, but Viggo instinctively blocked the dagger out of his own reflexes. Like, that is just perfect cast. What more could you want from the casting of Aragorn? Also, I'm kind of like an Aragorn fanboy. Like, I have the Ring of Barad-dûr, and obviously I have this. This isn't the actual replica of Underhill. This is kind of like a cheap knockoff I bought off Amazon a couple of years ago. But I do intend on buying the proper replica of Underhill because I love this sword. It's amazing. But also, when it comes to Aragorn in the films compared to Aragorn in the books, I much prefer Aragorn in the films just because, to me, book Aragorn is just a bit arrogant. The way Aragorn in the book reads to me is he's very arrogant. He walks around a lot of the time with his nose in the air, just like, "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Here beside me are the shards of Narsil. I am Elendil's heir. I will be the king of men." And whilst I understand that Tolkien is sort of making it like a King Arthur, divine right of kings sort of thing, I just don't really gel with it because he kind of just comes across as very arrogant. He doesn't have a lot of the tender, more sincere moments and moments of contemplation and reflection that Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn does. He just walks around just like, "I am heir to Gondor, I am Isildur's heir." Whilst you take a look at Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn, and he is just the best guy ever. But also that internal conflict, that hesitation of accepting his role as heir of Isildur and being the heir to the throne of Gondor, I like it more because by the time you get to Return of the King, those two films where he is doubting his role, and you see him grow more as a leader in Two Towers, becoming that leader-like figure in the Battle of Helm's Deep, basically running Rohan for Theoden. You get to Return of the King, you get to the moments where Elrond gives Aragorn Underhill, and it feels much more earned and much more believable. By the time he unsheaths that blade, you're like, yes, he is ready to be king. And that's a change I just prefer from the book too, having Aragorn earn Underhill rather than just having Aragorn have Underhill after he leaves Rivendell is just much more impactful because, like I said, by the time he gets that sword, you feel like he is ready to be king. In many ways, it's kind of like what many Jon Snow fanboys were hoping for when you got to Game of Thrones Season 8 and you found out he was heir to the Iron Throne. And whilst Aragorn is my favourite character of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the best character is obviously Gollum. The way Andy Serkis brings this character to life, the way the visual effects artists over at Weta brought him to life, the way the motion capture helped bring him to life, the way Peter Jackson and the writing team wrote Gollum is nothing short of fantastic and phenomenal. Gollum is just incredibly tragic and you pity him. Like, pity is what stayed Bilbo's hand. That's the thing. The films do such a great job at humanizing but also making you pity Gollum, because whilst Gollum ends up failing his redemption arc in Two Towers, and that's mainly because it's Frodo and Faramir's fault, but you basically realize that Gollum is just a tragic person. He is the perfect tragic character.
But Master's my friend. You don't have any friends.
And then obviously you have Sean Astin as Samwise Gamgee, and Samwise Gamgee is obviously the real hero of the Lord of the Rings trilogy because he actually, you know, does stuff. Frodo wouldn't have got far without Sam. But also, I really just love Samwise's arc throughout the trilogy of him finding himself, because obviously in Fellowship, you see him, he is the gardener for Frodo and Bilbo Baggins. He's too awkward and shy to ask out Rosie Cotton. But by the time you get to Return of the King and you see him grow, he is just Samwise the Brave, going around slashing down orcs with Sting. It's great stuff. He goes back to the Shire and marries Rosie Cotton and has his dream family and kids, and it's all wonderful stuff. It's just a strong character arc. Merry and Pippin are also great side characters too that actually go through quite a strong arc of them both realizing that there is more to the world than just the Shire, and how the events and consequences of the events of the Outer Worlds can affect the Shire. Most of that happens in Two Towers, but by the time you also get to Return of the King, they both understand the severity and gravity of war. Boromir is also one of the more fascinating characters that I think benefited from the writing treatment of Peter Jackson and his writing team, just because when you read the books, Boromir is kind of just there, and like his death is kind of like half-assed. It's like the first chapter in Two Towers, and they're just like, oh, Boromir died, okay, cool, let's go. But Peter Jackson and the rest of the writing team really just fleshed out Boromir. You understand his goals, his motivations. The scene in Lothlorien where he's talking to Aragorn about returning home. Do you see it, Aragorn? The White Tower of Ithilien.
Have you ever seen it, Aragorn? White Tower of Ithilien, glimmering like a spike of pearl and silver.
It really just humanizes his character because he doesn't want the ring for his own selfish desire. He wants it to protect and save his people, and the flashbacks in Two Towers are there to help accentuate that goal for him. Also, let's not forget the fact that he's portrayed by Sean Bean, and Sean Bean just eats up this role. He is fantastic. But the thing too, and that I just love now, is obviously that Sean Bean is also famous for playing Ned Stark. But when you watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you do not see Ned Stark, you only see Boromir, and when you watch Game of Thrones Season 1, you do not see Boromir, you see Ned Stark. That to me just shows nothing more but the acting prowess of Sean Bean, because you do not see Ned Stark in Boromir, and you do not see Boromir in Ned Stark. It's so well done. Though you do hear a little hint of his Yorkshire accent slip out in Two Towers, when he's delivering the speech of, "This city used to be a place of light, and beauty, and music." You can hear a bit of the Yorkshire accent slip into his Queen English accent. It's kind of funny. And with Boromir also comes Faramir, and I like David Wenham's portrayal of Faramir in the movies well enough. I just think that in Two Towers, they write him to be a bit of a dickhead. I mean, you understand it more because you see in the flashbacks that he is the least favorite son of Denethor, and also, at the end of the day, he just wants to be there for his brother and protect his city, but because Denethor hates Faramir so much, he is left but in the shadow of Boromir. But the thing that I just find strange about Faramir in Two Towers is that he's kind of an asshole for a bit, for no reason. When he meets Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, and he sees the Ring of Power, he's very much succumbed by the temptation of taking it. But then, by the end of the film, he realizes, oh no, the ring does nothing good, it only corrupts, and he lets them go. And then there's that weird bit where, like, the guy's like, oh, Faramir, if you do that by the laws of your country, your life will be forfeit. But that doesn't actually pay off in Return of the King, so there's kind of no point of having that line in there. But also, it's like, Faramir's like an asshole for no reason. Like, he's not like that in the book. When he sees that Frodo, Sam, and Gollum have the One Ring, he's just like, oh no, I don't want that. You guys need to get out of here and on your way, because there is nothing good that comes out of that ring. But no, Peter Jackson, to add extra layer of conflict and to pad out the length of Two Towers, is all just like, a chance for Faramir, Captain of Gondor, to show his quality.
Chance for Faramir, Captain of Gondor, to show his quality.
But then you get to Return of the King, and no, David Wenham is perfect as Faramir. He's literally how he is described in the book. He acts like how he is in the book. He's all kind and jovial. He becomes best friends with Pippin. Like, that's how Faramir should have been in Two Towers. And then, of course, you've just got the rest of this vast cast. You've got Surrey and McKellen as Gandalf the Grey, Gandalf the White, and he's just perfect. The theatricality and iconography he brings to Gandalf is amazing. Same thing goes for Sir Christopher Lee as Saruman, although it's kind of interesting that he actually knew Tolkien when Tolkien was alive, but also he was pretty much promised the role of Gandalf, but by the time they finally made the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Peter Jackson was like, actually, I think you're a better fit for Saruman, and he wasn't wrong there. Not saying Christopher Lee wouldn't have been an amazing Gandalf, but he just fits too well as Saruman. You've got John Rhys-Davies as Gimli, who is a great comedic relief, and we've got my boy Orlando Bloom as Legolas. The thing about Legolas is that as the years have gone by, the more I've realized that Legolas is kind of a useless character. He's only there to look pretty, be badass, and just say really vague and weird shit. They run as if the very whips of their masters were behind them.
They run as if the very whips of their masters were behind them.
Like, that's literally all Legolas does. Like, why is he even there? Even Frodo doesn't remember his name. And then there's just the further additional side characters, like Cate Blanchett as Galadriel, who's just amazing. You've got Bernard Hill as Theoden, who's great. You've got Miranda Otto as Éowyn. And Carl Urban, Billy Butcher himself, as Éomer. God, it's so weird seeing him in this trilogy after watching The Boys Season 3, just because, like, Carl Urban is a really great actor, and you see him in The Boys do this horrible Cockney accent, which now I know is definitely intentional, because when you rewatch Lord of the Rings, he does a British accent, and he does it perfectly, and so the voice he puts on for Billy Butcher is intentionally bad.
Theoden King stands alone.
Oi, oi.
Also, speaking of The Boys, you've got John Noble, who in The Boys plays Billy Butcher's dad, but in Lord of the Rings he plays Faramir's dad. Like, that's great. He plays Denethor. So passes Denethor, son of McKellen. You've also got Brad Dourif as Grima Wormtongue, and I just realized this, but he is the original Paiter de Vries in David Lynch's Dune film, which is kind of funny because Paiter and Grima Wormtongue are pretty much like the same character. But honestly, the cast for this trilogy is just so vast and huge, and if I have not mentioned a specific actor or character, just to let you know, they're great whoever they are. And obviously, when it comes to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, from a filmmaking standpoint, a cinematography standpoint, from Howard Shore's fantastic score to the songs in the soundtrack, it's all just amazing. The artistry that is on display here is nothing short of phenomenal and some of the best cinema has ever produced. I mean, when it comes to the swords of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy are iconic. I love the design of Underil, I love the design of Sting, I love the design of Glamdring, I love the design of Theoden's sword, Eomer's sword, I love the design of Boromir's sword and shield, I love the design of Gimli's axe, I love the design of Legolas's daggers and bow. Honestly, the craftsmanship and design work and artistry that is on display here is nothing short of phenomenal. And I do not think we will see this like ever again. And to wrap things up, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is without a doubt one of the greatest trilogies ever made. It is one of the greatest pieces of fantasy media ever made. It is nothing short of remarkable. These films are all masterpieces in their own right. Even though I have nitpicks and complaints, they are all kind of made out of jest and love, because honestly, these films are just so incredibly well made. There is a reason why they won so many Oscars and why they were nominated for so many Oscars. Though I do think it was criminal that Andy Serkis was robbed of his Oscar nominations and wins, because we all know he would have won because Gollum is phenomenal. Just the way Peter Jackson and his writing team and his visual team, his production team brought this trilogy to life was nothing short of a miracle. I love this cast. I love the way Peter Jackson adapted these books to the screen. The story is amazing. Howard Shore's score is legendary. I know I may not have covered everything in this video, everything down to the last minute detail, to the last silly, goofy reference, to the silly movie mistakes, but at the end of the day, The Lord of the Rings is just so expansive, so masterful. Like, what else is there to say about it? They are without doubt some of the greatest films to have ever been made, and they are just some of my favorite films to ever watch. If I'm ever feeling down or depressed in life, I will just rewatch the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's funny, the whole trilogy is one of those films where you can kind of just watch them like all the time. I could never get bored of these films. But those are just my thoughts on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. Until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.